This presentation covers Chapter 4, Self-Directed Learning from the book, Adult Learning, Linking Theory and Practice. Self-directed learning, also referred to as SDL, appears in many forms. SDL projects may be simple, like learning a new skill or tackling a home improvement project, or it can take on more serious challenges, like confronting life-changing issues. Malcolm Knowles established self-concept or self-direction as his first assumption of adult learners, stating that SDL is a hallmark of adult learning. Listen to Malcolm Knowles describe the role of self-directed learning in adults from 1975.
There are 5 main sets of assumptions that differentiate pedagogy from andragogy. The first having to do with the self-concept of the learner. Pedagogy assumes that a learner is, in effect, a dependent personality. And I think this is true of very young children. They are indeed dependent upon the adult world to make decisions for them. But my own speculation is that as the child matures, he moves toward a self-concept increasingly of autonomy or self-directiveness. And psychologically, we define adulthood as the arrival at a self-concept of self-directedness. So andragogy assumes that the learner has a self-concept of being self-directive.
Over the past few decades, SDL has been defined in multiple ways. Depending on the context and who you ask, it is considered both a personal attribute as well as a process. As a personal attribute, this is referring to an individual's predisposition toward learning and their comfort with autonomy in the learning process. As a process, SDL is an approach to learning that is controlled by the learner. In a study conducted in 1971, Alan Tuff found that 90% of 66 adult subjects in a study engaged in at least one learning project, and 70% of those projects were planned by the learners themselves. You might be wondering how long someone might participate in self-directed learning. Well, it depends on your goals. SDL can be used for short projects lasting only hours and can also be applied to continuous projects lasting a lifetime. Knowles defined SDL as a process where individuals take the initiative with or without help of others to define their own learning outcomes. For the planning of SDL, Knowles created a 6-step contract. The first step in this contract is to create an atmosphere of mutual respect and support. Knowles referred to this as the climate setting. The second step is to evaluate and diagnose the needs of the learner. Third comes the formulating of learning goals. The fourth step is to gather material resources for learning. Fifth is choosing appropriate learning strategies. And finally, the 6th step is establishing the learning outcome or goals. Caffarella from 2000 suggests there are 4 motivational goals that help learners engage in SDL. The first goal is the aspiration to gain knowledge or develop a skill. The second is to become more self-directed in learning. Learning can breed the desire to learn more. Third, knowledge may inspire transformational learning and change personal viewpoints. Fourth and finally, SDL can be emancipatory, supporting social justice and political action. The first research into adult learning began in earnest in the late 1960s. SDL resonated with researchers producing a large body of writings and opinions. This body of research included plenty of misconceptions, which Brockett in 1994 determined as myths. Myth number 1. SDL is an all-or-nothing concept. You're either self-directed or not. The truth is that everyone is different. We all possess varying levels of self-directedness. Some more, some less, but not either or. Myth 2. Self-direction implies learning in isolation. This is a stereotype. The truth is that a learner may engage in periods of individualized isolation, but learning is enhanced through sharing with others. Myth number 3. SDL is the best approach for adult learners. This is an inaccurate oversimplification. The needs of learners should always be taken into account, and SDL should be used appropriately. Myth 4. SDL is limited primarily to white middle-class adults. This myth is the primary criticism of SDL, but examples of SDL are seen across diverse social groups and in societies outside of North America. Myth 5. SDL is not worth the time required to make it work. For any instructional design, a cost-benefit analysis should be run. Not all learning can be accomplished with SDL, but when appropriate, SDL can result in deeper learning than teacher-directed approaches. Myth 6. SDL is limited to reading and writing. The truth is that experiential, self-directed learning typically works best. Myth 7. Facilitating SDL is easy for teachers. The truth is actually the opposite. Facilitating SDL is demanding. Myth 8. SDL is limited to settings where freedom and democracy prevail. The truth is that SDL occurs even in controlled social environments. Women and girls who continue to learn under Taliban rule are a good example of this. Myth 9. Self-direction is just another fad. This myth is easily debunked by the longevity of SDL as a theory and practice in adult education for well over 50 years. Finally, myth number 10. SDL will erode the quality of institutional programs. This has not happened. The only risk to quality education is when SDL is poorly administered. The process of SDL is not linear. While some, like Knowles, have come up with a particular process, like his 6-step contract, others ascribe an open, less planned process. George Spear did not believe that self-directed learning projects occurred in linear, lockstep formation. Instead, learning spirals between several sets of activities. For example, while searching the library for information on a particular topic, a student discovers a tangential but related concept, so she decides to pursue the topic by searching the internet, where she finds a virtual community discussing the topic. She joins the community and interacts with others interested in the topic. Through this winding path, she discovers new insights and understanding. Her circumstances and environment have organized her learning, albeit in a way she did not predict. As mentioned previously, self-directed learning can be described as a process and as a personal attribute. Brockett and Heimstra in 1991 suggested that self-directed learning is positively associated with high self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is a person's belief in his or her ability to succeed in a particular situation. The Self-Directed Learning Readiness Scale, or SDLRS, was developed by Dr. Lucy Guglielmino. According to Guglielmino, SDLRS is a blend of attitudes, values, and abilities that predispose a learner's capacity for self-directed learning. We understand that SDL happens in a myriad of contexts, and it may be employed in a variety of learning environments. Here are some other important factors to keep in mind. We learn best when we are comfortable in familiar environments, and our own life experiences help generate learning. SDL is prominent in continuing professional education, but challenging to integrate into higher ed. We need new ways of understanding SDL in order to facilitate it in online education. Assessment is an important consideration for SDL. Self-assessment should begin with goals that are appropriate and attainable. SDL is less successful when there is a high dependency on the instructor or when a project starts off with an unclear vision. Assessing SDL requires that the learner can self-monitor and self-modify. For example, self-monitoring could include asking others for their perspective, and based on their feedback, adjustments may be made to the SDL project accordingly. It's important when discussing different learning techniques to acknowledge the fact that everyone learns differently. A learning style for one individual may play to their strengths, whereas it may produce complications for someone else. Also consider that not all learners have access to the tools required for some self-directed learning. For example, it's hard to research online articles and participate in discussion boards when your region doesn't have internet access. As for the cultural aspect, Hung-Jung Lee explains that Confucius asserted that students would need a competent teacher to guide them, and believed students would better spend their time absorbing structured ideas than thinking independently. Quite a contrast with the ultimate goal of Western-style universities to create self-directed, self-motivated, and independent learners. It's important for us as instructional designers, educators, and trainers to be sensitive to learners from different cultures around the world if our goal is to effectively support and facilitate learning. And of course, it is. This presentation was created by Brenton Jenkins, Chris Syracuse, and Theresa Jackson. Thank you for joining us and learning about self-directed learning. We hope you came away from this presentation with a better understanding of what SDL is and how to prepare, perform, and assess your learning.